I'm Tracy Burns, in for Judge Napolitano. Well, before the judge left, he taped an interview with columnist Jack Hunter about a supposed weakness in Ron Paul's campaign, his foreign policy. Take a listen.
Attacks on Congressman Ron Paul's campaign claim he is not fit for the American presidency because of his foreign policy views. The critics claim he's an isolationist. But is this charge accurate? Or is he something else, namely a non-interventionist? So, how would a libertarian foreign policy keep us safe? With us now to sort out the distinctions is author Jack Hunter. Jack, it's always a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Good to be with you.
Why does the establishment, the big government Republicans, that would be all of them running against him, call him an isolationist? What does that conjure up?
Well, because they don't want to have the discussion that Ron Paul is having with the Republican Party, that we're doing too much overseas, that we can't afford it. I always like to point out this, is Canada isolationist? Is Sweden isolationist? If a country isn't everywhere in the world all at one time, spending all this money, flexing its military muscle globally all at one time, does that mean they're isolationists? Well, America, is probably doing too much right now. A lot of our military experts think that. A lot of our political experts, and we know we can't afford it. This notion that we can't talk about it, that we can't have a cost-benefit analysis on Afghanistan and Iraq, is not isolationist.
Okay.
It's a conversation the Republicans do not want to have.
Let me pose this conversation to you. We wake up one morning and there's a Chinese fleet in New York Harbor, and Ron Paul is president. What would he do? Would he look the other way?
That is an act of war, and you'd blow them out of the water. First of all, they shouldn't have got that far to begin with. There would have been some line out there in the Atlantic Ocean.
All right.
That's
I just wanted to give you the most frightful example.
Well, that's right, and that's a common misperception. Ron Paul believes in a strong national defense. In fact, his budget provides for a military 4 times the size of China. I mean, we're talking about a large, strong national defense.
But
the question is, when do you use it? How often do you use it? Does it make sense when you use it? And how much money are we spending?
All right. Does Ron Paul agree with Admiral Mullen, the recently retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who said our greatest national security threat is the national debt? Stated differently, would he keep open the 900 military facilities that we have around the world?
Absolutely not. There's a big difference, and Admiral Mullen was absolutely right, between a national defense, which Ron Paul supports strongly, and an irrational offense, which is a lot of what we do around the world today.
All right, Ron Paul and Israel. Why is this controversial in the Republican Party? I mean, Ron Paul is in favor of the right of every nation to defend itself. There was a time during the Iraq War, in the Iraq-Iran War in the 80s, when Ron Paul stood up for and defended Israel against the other Republicans, one of whom was Ronald Reagan.
That's exactly right. And Ron Paul said repeatedly that Israel should be, and always has been, one of our best friends. You're talking about 1981, when Israel decided to attack a nuclear reactor, and the entire United States Congress condemned Israel, except who? Ron Paul. He stood by Israel, the right to their own self-defense, and defended their sovereignty. It is up to that nation or any nation to do whatever it needs to.
What has been the tradition of conservative Republicans in the Republican Party prior to the George W. Bush days about using the Defense Department for defensive purposes only?
Well, if you go back to Robert Taft, you look at Barry Goldwater, you look at Ronald Reagan, it's to have a sober and realistic national defense. Ronald Reagan, for all these Republicans running for president saying they're Reaganites on foreign policy, we didn't have any prolonged wars under Ronald Reagan. We weren't in Iraq and Afghanistan for 10 years or anything like that, facing a menace far greater than anything we face today in the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons in our backyard. Something much more worse to deal with. And yes, Ron Paul is closer to what Reagan believed in, Barry Goldwater, Robert Taft. It is the conservative Republican tradition to be sober in our foreign policy.
Got it. Jack Hunter, it's a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Judge.